Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are moving into one of our 2 fireside chats this afternoon. I'm really excited about this one because we've been talking about lots of issues, but this is really focusing on how do we move from policy and take that policy into action and make sure that the kind of digital transformation that we're doing ultimately does make a difference to people's lives. I know I've been saying this throughout the day that we have fantastic speakers, but we really do have 2 brilliant speakers here with us for this fireside chat. So we are going to hear from Mina Hsiang, who is Administrator at the United States Digital Service, and Robin Carnahan, who is Administrator at the General Services Administration. Please join me in a warm welcome to both of our speakers.
So many USDSers.
And so I think, not least from my perspective, because obviously coming from the UK and we have quite a few international delegates here today, it would be really helpful if you could just give me a bit of an introduction to yourselves, your department, kind of where you sit and what your current priorities are and your focuses in terms of that, really making sure that we get from policy to action in terms of digital transformation. Mina, I'll start with you.
Certainly, and thank you so much for having us here. So great to see the international colleagues and my USDS colleagues and from across the federal government. So I'm an engineer by training, but I have done several cycles through various levels of government and the federal government. And partly it's because I love that combination and interplay between execution and policy and sort of how we decide what we want to do and then how we actually get it done. So USDS is an organization of about 230 technologists at this point, and I use that term extremely broadly. As many of you know, it requires strong interdisciplinary teams to deliver technology. So we have designers, product managers, engineers, procurement experts, operations experts, and all of those folks sit together, attached to the Office of Management and Budget, which is a part of the Executive Office of the President. And so we are on the management piece of that. And we effectively do a few different key things. The main one is we deploy to agencies across the federal government in small interdisciplinary teams to focus on, exactly as you say, how do we execute against critical programs and ensure that the outcomes that the public experiences match the intent of the program. So as you all know, there's critical missions that all of our agencies are working to deliver. There are important policy objectives that are outlined both at a central level and also at an agency level. They may have come from Congress. And the question of how do we execute that, as you all know, technology underpins sort of everything operational in the modern world. And so making sure that we have the technical capacity and expertise to enable that implementation at the same time as everything else is being worked through at the agency is a critical piece of it. So we do that in a bunch of different capacities across many agencies. Right now, we're working on about 20 different projects across about a dozen different agencies in the federal government. And then the other half, it's a smaller from an hours perspective, but I think critical thing that we get to do is we take that experience that we are working with agencies of how it's working, and we partner with Claire Martorana's team and sort of all of the various policy teams at the White House, and we can bring sort of endpoint user experience back to the center to say, okay, if we're rolling out a new digital experience guidance, if we're rolling out AI policy, or any number of other policies, we can actually bring sort of an implementer and an end user voice directly to that policy to provide that consultation.
Fantastic. So really bookending that kind of policy process. And Robin, similarly, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what the General Services Administration does in this respect?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us, and great to see so many friends here. I started my life in this journey at 18F, which was a technology team inside of GSA many years ago, and that came from my experience. I was an elected official in my home state of Missouri, and I learned there that if you could not make websites work, it was just like in the olden days, if a mayor couldn't get snowplowed, they didn't deserve to have the job, and you would get unelected. And same thing, like right now, and I always say our job in government is to make the damn websites work. I think that is still our job in government. Yes, go team, go damn website working. So like that's what really got me into this. Is I came from as somebody not a technologist. I'm a lawyer by training, but when I was in office, there was nothing that I did that caused me to lose more sleep than the rollout of some new technology platform, because it always went wrong, always was over budget, always whatever excuses, and I was the goat holding the bag about the whole thing when everybody thought it ought to work. So when I got out of office, I ended up joining this team at GSA, and then sort of began to understand technology a little bit more and how there are fundamental issues about how we can do that better and we can stop reinventing the wheel, and the experience of citizens and their government is actually quite similar from a technological point of view, no matter what the service is. And so that we don't have to reinvent these wheels, so that there are ways we can do this better. So ended up joining the Biden administration at GSA to run it, and it is a really big operation. It's got about 12,000 people around the country. We have the biggest real estate portfolio in the country. We buy about $100 billion worth of goods and services for agencies. I could go on, but a lot of that's technology. And so we are the home of shared services, if you think about it. So part of our job is to build things that are common needs and problems across government. So if you think about things like login.gov, a single sign-on for government, that is a GSA thing, no login team. The US web design system, which is, for folks around the world, if you don't know about this, take a look at it. It's online, it's open source, and it basically makes sure that all the websites are accessible and you don't have to reinvent wheels again. This is an open source tool that anybody could use. So we have teams that build things. That's just a couple examples. We have teams that buy things on behalf of government agency partners. Nowadays, obviously, that's a really big deal. Security is a big deal. AI is a big deal. Supply chain risk management. The FedRAMP program, which, again, that's a thing that we do to make sure cloud services are secure before they're used in government. That is housed at GSA. And then the third piece really that we focus on is talent. How do we bring talent into the government? Lots of technologists are patriotic. They want to serve their country. It's up to us to figure out nice, easy pathways to get into government. So the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program is with us. The U.S. Digital Corps, I see our friends here from the U.S. Digital Corps, but lots of other on-ramps through the Technology Transformation Service. So we probably have, and tell me if this is true, the largest number of technologists in government are housed at GSA. Probably outside of CISA or DOD.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we do.
Fantastic. So a lot. You do a lot in GSA.
So they do a lot of policy. We do a lot of the actual, we've got to implement this stuff.
You've got to implement it. So between you guys, you are covering that policy to action kind of landscape. I am going to allow some time for questions. So just to say, if you do have questions, I love an audience that cheers at a website when a website
I know. You need to cheer a little louder for some of these.
Yeah,
Yes.
I really like that. So I sense there are going to be questions from the room, but I have one more question myself to both of you, which is when we talk about digital transformation in the public sector, we can talk about internal transformation, so how we actually get better and more efficient ourselves at doing our jobs. But we can also talk about transforming the way we provide services to the public. Both are things that we're dealing with. Do you have any examples that have really struck you of things that have gone particularly well? So any examples? Because we talked a lot about the challenges, but I also want to leave people, we do brilliant stuff in the public sector. Yep. So Mina, any examples of really good things that you can think of?
Sure, absolutely. And some inspired by...
I'm going to talk about direct file.
No, I'm going to talk... We're going to talk together about direct file.
Don't talk about direct file.
We're going to talk together about direct file, which is inspired by many of your countries, where it's called a Tuesday. But together, USDS, in collaboration with the IRS and 18F and GSA, just rolled out recently this tax season a web application that allows people to file their taxes for free. It's easy. It has sheer. Some of our key project leaders are right here.
Can we see?
Let's give them like a.
The direct file team.
Direct file.
Who else from the team? Woohoo!
Right. And it has both of those innovations that you asked about. So it's a foundationally different way of filing your taxes and sort of interacting with government, there are also other innovations as part of it to make customer service different. So instead of having to call the call center, the team worked closely with the call center staff and the IRS staff to implement a chat capability, so that is a new way of working that the customer service representatives found incredibly helpful and was really useful for and scalable, both for accessing that assistance for the public and also a really valuable new way for internal folks. So it sort of is both of the things. Yep. And there are sort of the other piece that everyone knows here, just because we're talking about policy, at the moment that you try and implement policy in code is when you learn a lot of things about your policy, right? Like when you actually have to write it as code, you're like, oh, shit, this is not like mutually exclusive. And so, a ton of the work is not just in, they've done it before, in standing up the infrastructure, but also working through the details and navigating with normal people in the course of user testing. Okay, is this language clear? And then circling back with the lawyers to say, is this language exactly right? And that iterative process really helps you understand what your policy really says. So anyways, that's one example. We also have recently worked with the Social Security Administration to help revamp a lot of their consumer-facing website, and we're about to do a bunch of additional work with them to dramatically, oh, and the new CIO at SSA is in the house, so we're very excited to partner with her on that. And so, a lot of work to help say, the policy is what people actually experience, right? Like we write a policy, that's not what actually happens. So figuring out how we can make it simple for people to access the policies and the services that they're due through that website was really helpful as well.
Thank you. Normally the energy levels by this point in the day dip. I love the fact that with you two on the stage, they're just getting more and more. Robin, your examples
up,
of
right?
things.
Okay, well, my one thing about Direct File, like our team's been great. Mercy, the team's been great. It's been just incredible to watch. There was a headline, you probably remember it, but I think it was something like, finally a government website that doesn't suck. Was that it? It was like, all right, there we go, we'll take that. So that's just a great example. I don't know, how many of y'all during COVID signed up to get a COVID test sent to your house? A lot of people. So for folks who are from overseas, during the whole COVID thing, like tests were hard to come by. The government decided they were going to send tests out to people's houses. Very risky thing. It was hard to get tests. It was, the stressful environment. And it was done through the Postal Service. And so past experience with a thing called healthcare.gov some years ago still had a lot of PTSD with a number of people when it came to government websites. And the team did an incredible job. And USDS folks helped, and I think maybe some folks from our team, but a lot of folks from the Postal Service deserve all the credit for this. But it was super simple. They did a lot of things smart. They didn't just roll it all out on the same day. They incrementally did it. They had testers come in and do things. And this part I loved the most is, so on the day they sort of just opened it up for beta testing, I called my mother, my 89-year-old mother, and said, Mom, you need to go to this website, covidtest.gov, order your test. And she's like, no, just do that for me. And I said, no, really, Mom, you can do this, go do it. 90 seconds later, phone call. Robin, that was the easiest website I have ever used. That was just so simple. This is just, she was going on, but then here's what she said. Kicker at the end, just your mother will say, are you going to make all the websites work that well?
That is a risk, though, that when you do something really good over here,
you raise expectations. Right, exactly. But that's a good thing. And I want to mention one other, and that is something that we have taken, open source code that was developed in the UK, developed in Canada, called Notify. And so we have a thing in the US called notify.gov. And the idea is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can figure out ways to do text messaging between government and the people they serve in ways that obviously just save a ton of time, money, friction, all of the things that we're about saving. So I love that story because it's also just smart for us because we have these similar interactions to share experiences and share
have-
actual code.
We have Stephen Burt sat over there from Canada, so he's very happy to hear that, I think, what you were just saying there, learning from each other.
Yep.
As I say, we are going to come out to the audience, but it's great to hear what you both said there, because you've picked up on so many themes that have come out throughout sessions throughout the day. And what you were saying about that, the experience of somebody using the website in the session we've just had, they were saying it had to be seamless, simple, and secure. And it sounds like that's what you've managed to achieve with some of these things. So over to the audience we have. I'm just glancing at the clock. We've got just 10 minutes for questions. Who would like to put the first question? I'm going to look throughout the whole...
We're going to start calling
We're
on
gonna
people.
ask you
We're going to
questions.
call on people. We know
Yeah.
enough
Ask.
people. Okay.
Lady there.
Lady there.
Be thinking about your next question, because I'm going to come to somebody very soon.
Am I
after
talking
this.
close? Can you hear now? No. Okay, now you can. Hi, I'm Judy Cohen-Stevens from NIH, digital communication specialist. I worked on the first 3 open enrollments of healthcare.gov, so I still have PTSD when I was at CMS. But anyways, the question I had was, so how do you get that policy, mindset of this is a policy that we need to do, right? Or this is an action, kind of trickle down and filter to everybody. Because in one of the earlier sessions about accessibility, that law's been on the books for 40 years, and people still ask me, is it a law? Is it a guidance? Do we have to do it? How do you get people to kind of get it? I don't know. What are your insights?
I will. Let me just talk about this from a non-technical point of
Yeah.
view first, and you go next, because I have this mantra, which is make it easy for people to say yes. What does that mean in this context? It means this is why the web design standards and things are so simple, because they really are easy to adopt. And so the more we can understand what our users need, anticipate what their problems are going to be, and make it easy for them to say yes, then it's just a matter of asking. So that's kind of my philosophy about this. I know it's simplistic. Then you got to work on budgets and things like that. Sometimes you have to have hammers, but the first step is make it easy to say yes.
Yeah. I also think, speaking in normal language is really helpful. I think when I first came to government, people keep saying policy, and I was like, what is policy? And sometimes policy is strategy, and sometimes policy is implementation, and sometimes policy is internal rules and regulations about how we conduct ourselves. And we use very different words in the arena of technology and in the arena of policy, and have very similar concepts, but we sort of are talking past each other. So the more that you can sort of be the people who either understand both sides and can help bridge the gap, or can just speak plain English and talk about the actual stuff we're all trying to get done together, you can then make it much easier for people to get to yes. Because saying are you 508 compliant is very opaque, but if the question is can someone who's blind use this website, shouldn't they be able to? Oh, is there a package for that? Great, let's just do that. There's just much more.
And every
normal
profession has its own language, doesn't it, that they
Yeah.
tend to use. So actually breaking that down, really important. Thank you. Who would like to put the next question? I'm looking over to the whole of the room. I want to make sure we get... Yes, we've got a lady down here at the front.
Oh, hello, Florence.
Bring a microphone here.
Hi there, Florence Casule from U.S. Digital Service. In the session right before this one, maybe it was the one before that, the woman from Iceland said that they had a model where they went implementation first and then policy,
Love it.
which I loved the idea of that. Let's iterate, create something small, and then we'll wrap the policy around it, the thing that actually works. Do you see a moment or a time where that can actually be implementable?
Yeah, and Florence, it was Vigdis from Iceland who said they started with the idea, we are here to make people's lives better. Right. And they worked backwards from that to what does the policy then need to be in terms of digital transformation. So your thoughts on, do we do it the wrong way round at the moment?
I mean, I am so excited to go talk to them about that. I think it's iterative, right? It's a process where you, just like building anything that can be useful, you sort of build something, it gives you a hypothesis about the direction you should go, then that hypothesis tells you how you should change the thing that you've built. And one of the things that is really challenging about a classic policy process is its unidirectionality. Someone on the mountain on high declares that we need to have X.
It's called the hill.
Oh, yes.
mountain.
That mountain. However, there are a lot of policies that are informed by pilots out in the world that somebody has published on and figuring out what. So I think that there is some opportunities for that, and there are tremendous opportunities for us to build it into our process more. So one of the, several of these programs, Direct File is a good example. We've worked on some other programs like implementing the Medicare and Chip Reauthorization Act. There have been a lot of policies that we have worked on implementing where you can actually, even in the notice and comment process where like if you publish a proposed rule, if you can do some user research and that informs then your final rule, then there are opportunities to do a cycle. But I think it's a really interesting question, like can we begin the cycle more explicitly somewhere else, or can we be much more explicit about valuing that as an entire process?
I have a thing I say, I even made stickers up that say demos, not memos.
Yes.
Which is what I feel about what you just said. I will say that during the pandemic, there were really a lot of experimentation going on. And I don't know, Larry Bufundo, are you in the room? Larry, I saw you before. Okay, Larry, get in the room. I'm talking about you. Anyway, so during the pandemic, one of the problems we had here was unemployment insurance. And people didn't have access to unemployment insurance, and these old, crunchy, COBOL-based systems were falling apart all over the country, and scammers were getting money, but people who actually deserved it weren't getting money, and it was really, the policy was messed up, but the systems were really, really bad. And so there were some groups that began working closely with states to figure out how to stand those back up and actually deliver for people in times of really desperate need. And what was interesting is the things that got built then went and informed the Department of Labor, which Larry, who I'm calling out again, was running that program and adopted a lot of the learnings that were, came up from the states after this. So there are examples of this, but it's not the natural course of events. So as Mina said, the more we can figure out how to do real life sort of demos and prototypes, bring those to policymakers, then that can better inform policy.
Brilliant. I'm looking at the clock, and unfortunately we have 2 minutes left, so we've got time for one final question. I do have one myself, if people...
There's a hand over there.
Thank you.
And a
Got a
gentleman
gentleman at the back here.
Sorry, Larry,
Hi.
too late.
Got two shout-outs.
John Roberts, I'm a new Presidential Innovation Fellow at USDA. I couldn't let USDS get the last word in. You're welcome. I was really curious. I've heard a lot in my early work, even with the agency, about state and local governments who are the actual end implementers of a lot of the things that we all work on. And it's my past work with agencies, I've seen it's hard to either you have the stick of regulations and compliance, or you're agnostic and you just let states and local do what they want. Do you have any advice for us federal technologists on how we can approach our work to thread the needle, to give them the guidance that they're craving, but also meet them where they are in terms of different maturity, in terms of different cultures, in terms of different capabilities?
So that's definitely a question from someone who's just started. Kind of advice on how to do it all.
I have lots of opinions.
I mean, I was going to say you've got a preeminent expert on the question here. I do think, delivery together is the strategy, right? Figuring out how you need to work together in whatever way is legal. So I think we have had a lot of success, as has Robin and her team, in working with state and local governments on programs when the state and local governments want help with those programs. Like it's as soon as they want that help, I think there's really good opportunities to engage directly. I do think, it can be, if you come in a circumstance where they're not asking for it, then you have a whole different experience and it becomes more of a compliance exercise. But in every scenario where they're pretty excited about it, you can always find a way to make that work, depending on what their needs and their position and maturity is. So I think just working together. But what would you say?
So here's my thing about this whole governmental structure in America, is we have this federated system, but when money is coming down from the federal government or from the state government to a county or a city, they're pretty inclined to want that money. Because the other alternative is to go ask their legislature for a tax increase or go to the voters for one, and like nobody wants to do that. So like if there's money to do a thing, more often than not, they're going to want to say yes to that money. Okay, now, the strings you attach to that money are your choice, right? And that's where I think the federal government needs to be a little smarter about the strings they attach to the money. And while what happens in real life is everybody comes back and wants an exception, right? So that they don't have to do whatever the thing is. But I think the real sort of trick here to get people to yes is if you think about the policy, think about that as almost legal code, right? And so what happens? Every state or everybody who takes the money has to translate all of those complicated legal words into computer code, right? To implement whatever the thing is. What if y'all over at the Department of Agriculture began to offer your interpretation
In open source.
of the code? And you do that in an open source way, and then states, they don't have to spend a whole lot of money reinterpreting what this means, translating this to getting their developers to translate it and their lawyers to do this, that, and the other, because y'all have done that for them. They then can just implement that. That helps on the front end, right, to save money. It helps on the back end on compliance, because you could imagine people get a safe harbor and not have the same level of audits and the threat of clawing money back if they did something wrong if they adopted this system. So back to the, make it easy for people to say yes, I would just figure out how to translate your code policy into implementable digital code and see how that works.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at the clock, and sadly we are out of time.
time.
I think that was some great advice for you at the start there. Thank you so much, Mina. Thank you so much, Robin. You really have kind of consolidated a lot of the themes that have come out of today's conversations, and I think left people with a lot of food for thought. Please join me in a warm round of applause for Robin and Mina. Thank you so much.